here today. We're about to start our presentation. We wanted to just say thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. People, well, everybody in this room probably knows, because I think you people have been following this and this process, and we appreciate it. But we are about 2 years into our general plan update process. And I think it was planned to be a 2-year process. Kind of one of the, as an illustration of the timing we had, we started actually on the day that the coronavirus pandemic emergency was declared. We were in a meeting with the general plan consultants and had to step out of the meeting and call the coronavirus emergency. It was March 13th or March 12th, of 2020. So we appreciate everybody for sticking with it, because we've been working on it a little longer than expected. But we actually had paused a couple of times so that we could, because we felt like in our community, we'd want to get in the room and be able to work through these issues. So today is a big landmark for us, because it's the first time we're able to get in the room and work on this together. So we're very excited to be at this point. Ron and I, Ron will be our presenter from Ramey and Associates, who we're working with. We just met for the first time physically after talking hundreds of times on Zoom. So it's a kind of a landmark day for us, but we really appreciate everybody for sticking with it and coming out tonight. For anybody who doesn't know, we're here tonight to talk about the land use, transportation, and safety elements, and we'll have some breakout sessions and a presentation focused on those issues. And we are updating those as part of our general plan update. The general plan update, for anybody who doesn't know, is our long-term planning document, and it really is intended to be kind of our long-term vision of the city. And so I think these 3 items in particular, the land use, safety, and transportation elements, are ones that are very important to all of us and to our community. So they're really important. It's fortunate that with this timing, we're able to have these discussions with the community in person. We also tonight are going to be doing some surveys via smartphones. So hopefully everybody brought their devices. You'll have the opportunity to provide your feedback through your devices. And also we'll be able to provide feedback through our people watching this either by Zoom or on our city channel will also be able to provide feedback. And we're also going to leave that open for the next 2 weeks. So anybody who leaves and wants to tell someone else who wasn't able to get here tonight that they should provide feedback, they'll have the opportunity to provide their feedback as well. Because the intent really is to try to get as many voices and as many people's feedback as we can tonight. So that's a little bit of background. I want to welcome everybody. I want to introduce the members of the team here tonight, who you'll be hearing from and working with throughout the course of tonight. And I believe we have a slide that shows that team. Give me 1 second. I think it's slide 3. And so from the city of Ojai, I am James Vega, the city manager. Sorry for not introducing myself a moment ago. Thank you. We have Robin Godfrey, our interim assistant city manager, is also going to be part of tonight's meeting. Lucas Seibert, our community development director. Alma Quizada, our public works director. Maura Macaluso, our planner. Sherry Herbrook and Brian Popovich from our community development department. And then from Ramey and Associates, our partners in the general plan update, we have Ron Whitmore. And Ron, do you want to introduce your team? And Ron's going to lead us through the presentation.
Thank you, James. So with us tonight, I'm Ron. I'm a principal with Ramey and Associates, which is the prime consultant for the general plan update. We actually have 2 other consultants on our team, Iteris, who is focusing on circulation and mobility, transportation issues, and also Rincon Consultants, which is focusing on environmental, cultural, safety, and also doing the CEQA work for the general plan update. With me here tonight are two of our senior planners from Ramey and Associates. Antra Tandon there behind working the Zoom and the Menti poll tonight. She was instrumental in both the analysis that led up to and helped us prepare for tonight's workshop, as well as Megan McNulty, another senior planner who's become quite familiar with some of your past work around design issues with the downtown and neighborhood plan, and has been involved with the plan from the project from the get-go. So thank you again. I want to say thank you all for coming out tonight as well. Like James, I feel like this is a really special occasion for me personally. I spent some of my formative years here in Ventura County, so it's exciting for me to be back here. But also just as a planner, this is the first public workshop I've been at, I think, probably since either early 2020 or late 2019. And so I am really happy to be back talking with people face to face, having a chance to bring people together in person to talk about issues that are really important for their community. So thank you very much for coming out tonight. I'll look forward to getting to know some of you over the course of the evening and as we proceed with the project as well. So the purpose of tonight's workshop is really quite simple. We want to share with you some updates on the project status. We know some of you have been following all along, and so this will be a bit of a refresher. Others of you I've met tonight, it's your first exposure to the project, and so we'll share a little bit of information about what we've done so far to bring you up to speed. But primarily we're here tonight because we really want some of your input on some policy options that we've lifted up based on our analysis as well as the previous community input, and will help inform next steps that we take before the Planning Commission and Council, which will then provide foundational guidance for developing the administrative draft of the general plan. So we're in the welcome phase. We have a short presentation, and interspersed within the presentation, as James mentioned, is some live polling. And so we hope you have a mobile device with you tonight. If you don't, we do have a few hard copies of the survey questions. We'll then spend about half our time actually in an open house format. There's 4 stations around the room, and we'll share more about what's at those stations and what to do with them. But that's where we also want you to have time to digest a little more detailed information and consider some policy options and some supporting maps to help you understand what those options are and what the implications might be, and then give us your feedback and thoughts on the worksheet, which we'll ask you to turn in at the end of the evening. And then we'll actually come back together as a group. We have some follow-up polling questions around some of the design options that we have to consider for the city, as well as an opportunity. We want to hear some of you report back any insights, new ideas, other suggestions related to any of the policy options that we're considering this evening. As with any community meeting, we just ask that everybody come with an open mind, be respectful, listen to each other, not cut each other off. If you have the floor, be mindful of the fact that other people also want to share their thoughts. So just be cognizant of how much time you're taking, that sort of thing. Old hat for all of us. We know you're a very active and involved community, and so you know what those common courtesies are of coming together in a public setting and deliberating over issues that you may not all agree on, but you can disagree respectfully, right? So we're going to start off, as I mentioned, with some presentation. I'm going to do a little presenting, and then we'll pause for a little polling, do a little presenting, and do some more polling. And then after the presentation, we'll break into the open house and then come back together again. Okay, so here's the very short and sweet introduction to a general plan. James already shared a bit. I'll go into a little more detail. A general plan is required by state law. It is really the foundational policy document that informs a whole lot of city decisions, land use, capital improvements, et cetera. A lot of things must be considered consistent with a city's general plan. And what's really neat about it, though, is it's designed to be very participatory and be very much a reflection of the community's vision for itself 20 to 30 years out. So it's really a very long range plan. And it's also very comprehensive. It touches on nearly everything that falls within a city's jurisdiction. And ideally, if done well, it does two things fundamentally. A, it preserves what people really value and don't want to see changed, while at the same time providing very clear direction for how to address issues that the community has identified as being important and priority items for them to change as they move forward into the future. Next slide, please. And just so we're all clear about what area we're talking about, by law, as part of a general plan update, you consider both the city and its surrounding sphere of influence. Cities in the outlined in black and the sphere of influence on this slide in red. We've been focusing primarily on the city because there was really no indication at the get-go that there was any interest really in expanding the city's boundaries. So we've been focusing primarily on the existing city area. Next slide, please. So there's two types of general plan updates. There are comprehensive updates, which is considering every element and updating it as appropriate. And then there's focused updates. And Ojai is taking a focused approach to this general plan update. And we're focusing on those 5 elements on the left: land use, circulation, safety, housing, and environmental justice. The housing element's been completed already. There was a statutory deadline associated with it. And because of the COVID-related delays, we had to prioritize that and completed that last year. Environmental justice is going to be integrated. The goals and policies are going to be integrated into the other elements. And so, which is why we're focusing tonight on land use, circulation, and safety. On the right side of the screen are the other elements that the city has adopted historically. As part of this update, though we aren't doing an update to each of those elements, we do need to ensure that all of them remain consistent with the elements that we are updating. So there are likely to be some changes to those as we update the GP, but we're not doing the comprehensive review and update of each of those elements. So as James also mentioned, so we started this some time ago. We actually really didn't start in this interest until the fall of 2020, where we kicked it off with really two things. It's phase 1, the listening and learning phase, where on the one hand, we invited community members to complete 2 surveys. One was a mapping survey where people showed us specific geographic places where they have assets they want to preserve and or issues that need to be resolved. And then also a written survey, a survey monkey survey, where we asked about values, vision, issues, and opportunities. While the community was completing that, the technical team was doing research on existing conditions. And that's what you have in the back of the room is copies of a lot of that existing conditions work. So we did a whole range of environmental reports, a health and environmental justice report, and a SWOT, a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities report focusing on land use and transportation. So then we transitioned to phase 2. Sorry, back please. The visioning phase. And if some of you, who participated in the March 2020 visioning workshop? Okay, a number of you. And so at that workshop, we shared some of the key drivers based on what we learned through those initial polls and the initial analysis, and got people's input about some prioritization on some of those issues, as well as some more specific guidance on different areas around the city where they wanted to see like how much change and what type of change. And all of that then was brought together to craft a vision statement and guiding principles, which we brought through the Planning Commission, which improved it, and then on to Council, who adopted in August of last year. Around that same time, as I mentioned earlier, the housing element was being done and was adopted in October of 2020. So phases 1 and 2 then were the foundation for the phase we're in now, which is the policy options phase, the output of which will be some direction related to some key policies around land uses, design issues, transportation network improvements, complete streets, and the degree to which the city wants to take measures to ensure safety against wildfire hazards. So that's what we're focusing on this evening. And actually, just so the next phase, then, so the direction based on this policy options phase will then be used as a foundation for crafting the initial draft of the general plan. That'll then again be brought to the community for review before it goes on to Planning Commission and Council for final adoption, and that'll continue through the end of this year and into 2023. So I think we're now at the point where we do our initial live polling. Sure. Yeah, there's copies in the back. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So unless someone does it on their own, does not know what strength weakness.
I believe, if memory serves, at the front end we summarized it by strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So yeah, we didn't do the traditional. There was too much because it wouldn't fit in that traditional quadrant format that you're familiar with. So, yeah. But I believe that's how the executive summary is organized. So, okay, so polling question. So, who doesn't have a mobile device with them, a cell phone or a tablet of some sort? Looks like everybody does. All right, so if you go to menti.com in a browser, does anyone not have a device? Yeah, menti.com. And then it'll ask you for a code, and the code is 29860215. And people who are watching at home can do this as well. Coming to a welcome screen. Great. If you're having trouble, raise your hand. We have people here to help out. Just menti.com. Yeah, I'm okay with this. Yeah. I've already reached the end of it once, but. Yeah, so as soon as everybody's there, then we'll introduce the first question. But we want to give people a minute who are. Yes. Yes. Okay, we got 13 who are signed in already, so it looks like we need a few more. Okay. Do you have a? Yeah, you're good. You're there. Yeah. Okay, so for those of you who've logged on remotely, if you've reached a screen with some welcome text at the top and a heart mid-screen, you're there. We'll start the polling in just a second. If you're struggling to get there, again, it's menti, menti.com. You should see this on your screen, and enter that code 29860215, and that should get you to the start screen. Okay. Anyone not at the welcome screen yet? Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So Antra's gonna, oh, excellent, thank you. So we always like to start with a simple question just to have people get familiar with the app. All right. Oh, can you re-enter the code? The code is always at the top of the screen still, 29860215 if you get logged out somehow. Yeah, this is okay. While you're answering this fun question, I just want to emphasize a few things. This is simply a polling survey. It's not a vote of any kind. It's an opportunity to provide another mechanism for us to get community input in an easy. Right. No, that's another thing. This is all anonymous. It's optional. We can't associate your answers with who you are. So I'll answer honestly, please. Particularly this ice cream question, because it's really critical. This is going to inform a lot of the work that we do moving forward. So. Okay. So Ojai is a mint chocolate chip city, followed closely by vanilla. That's good to know. So that's going to inform the branding for the general plan. So now the general plan is going to be green with brown kind of polka dots on the cover page. Okay, next question, please. Okay, this question is a little more serious. We do like to track who participates in general plan activities so that we can check that against what we know about the demographics of the community. And if we're not having representative participation, then we can adjust how we do outreach. Yes. Yes, it's always going to be at the top of the screen. So it's 2986-0215. So that's a good question. If you're older than 84, then I guess you pick that category. Oh, wait, no, there's 85 or older. Oh, is there someone here young under 25? Oh my goodness. Andre, did we miss an age category? Oh my goodness. You can correct it on the fly, can't you?
We're taking over. We consider the people in the 55 to 64 to be young.
All right. Again, we'll assume those of you who didn't respond to this question are in that missing category. So sorry about that minor typo on our part. Entre, we'll assume whoever didn't respond to this question is in that category. So all right, we'll move on to the next question. Okay. We also want to know what you consider to be your cultural or ethnic background. Again, we ask these questions.
And submitted it.
Oh, answer it again for me. Right. Excellent. That's why we do it. We do it in part to keep these interactive and to provide lots of opportunity for snide remarks. So. Okay, thank you. I think we're ready for the next question. Where do you live? In the city or one of the neighboring communities? Isn't this fun how you get to see the results as you're... Wait till we get to the slide bar questions after the open house part. Those are really fun. So. Okay, excellent. Good. A lot of people from Ojai, but another thing I like about this area is that people, even though they don't live in the city proper, have a lot of care really about what happens in the city. So welcome for those of you who aren't here. All right, thank you. I think we're ready for, is this the last question? Okay, all right. Thank you very much. So we're going to have a series of those quick polling questions a couple times during the presentation. And then even after the open house portion, we're going to come back and ask some more polling questions. So I'm glad you enjoy that aspect of it. Yeah. And if you may need to log back again. It's just the same code again when we come back to it. Okay, so very quickly, just a synopsis of what we did in phases 1 and 2 in preparation for this phase. Again, we did the existing conditions report, copies of which are in the back. We also did those 2 surveys, copies of which are in the back. Also available online for folks who are at home. You can go to the project website and download this material. Here's a snapshot of some of the input we got at that initial visioning workshop. We did ask, as I noted earlier, how much change people would like to see in different parts of the city. And interestingly, people were open to a fair amount of change, particularly along the corridors, Ojai Avenue and the other, oh, I'm sorry. So bottom left-hand is corridors, gateways. Sorry, the screen's a little wrinkly. And then, oh, sorry, the green is little or no change. The reddish is some change, and the tan is transformative change. And then, so we have on the left corridors and gateways, then light industrial at the Bryant area, and then village mixed use, so the areas around downtown itself, and then the residential neighborhoods in the rest of the city. So generally, people like the residential, the neighborhoods the way they are for the most part, and open to the most change in the corridors, but also in other parts of the city. Next slide, please, because we also asked people, okay, so what type of change specifically? And this table just simply summarizes what land use improvements and transportation improvements people specifically mentioned at the workshop. And we share this in part because this is where we got some of the ideas we were asking you about in more detail tonight, related to policy options for land use and for transportation. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's in the summary report. Megan will go look for us and let us know. We did, and I believe the report also summarizes that. This was a year and a half ago, so I don't remember off the top of my head. It's never perfect, right? I've never worked in a community where a perfectly representative group of people showed up, but that's why we do this and try to maximize participation, and also provide the materials after the fact, like we're doing in this case, so that people who weren't able to make it here tonight could still have the opportunity. But also why, at the end of the day, we live in democratic societies. We have commissions whose job it is to make recommendations ultimately to the policymakers who are elected by all of you, right? And so this is one of many opportunities you have to provide input on critical decisions before your city. Thank you. Yeah, so based on all that existing conditions work, as well as the community input from the surveys and the workshop, we crafted vision and guiding principles. The purpose of the vision is to describe what people really want to see 20, 30 years into the future, like that Ojai that you want to live in 20, 30 years from now, or that you want to make sure we have prepared for your children. And then the guiding principles are designed to be those principles to which the general plan should be true and consistent with, while it paves a pathway to that preferred vision. And I think, and that was, as I mentioned earlier, adopted by council in August of last year. And I think on the next slide, we have the vision. I'm not going to read it for you, but it should be no surprise. It fundamentally emphasized that people really appreciate and want to preserve how unique Ojai is, its natural setting, its strong artistic, cultural vibe and energy and character. The mix, and I like the word mosaic, the mosaic of people who live here. People want it to continue to be a welcoming and accessible people for people from all walks of life. Strong emphasis on sustainability, both preserving existing natural, cultural, environmental resources, and also being a leader in climate change. And then finally, there's a strong commitment here to supporting local businesses, and you have a long policy history of doing that very explicitly. So that's how it came together in a vision. And the next slide, there's a lot more text that describes each of these, but these are the guiding principles that were adopted, that we need to make sure as we proceed with an update to the GP, we're consistent with. So it would always be our point of reference looking backwards to make sure, okay, is this policy as written? Is it consistent? Does it get us the vision people want to see? And is it consistent with the guiding principles? Okay, so those were the setting the stage for this phase. We're in the policies options phase. Next slide, please. And just in a nutshell, and I'm sorry if you can't read this very well, but we're kind of going through kind of 3 steps here. First, we're exploring land use, transportation, and policy options, and this workshop tonight is part of that. We started that through some analysis with our technical team, some discussions with city staff in preparation for bringing a very clear of what we think are the most viable, useful options for the community to provide us very specific feedback on, and that's what tonight is all about. We'll then take that to the planning commission and then on to council for kind of affirmation, adjustment, and have council provide us like, yes, these are the policy options we think are most consistent with the community vision and guiding principles and should be the foundation for the draft general plan. And then we'll move on to phase 4 where we actually draft that general plan again for public review. Okay, so now I'm going to begin introducing some of the information related to the 3 topics we're really focusing on tonight: transportation, safety, and land use. And for transportation, there's really 2 parts to it. One is the circulation network, and I always think of it as a map, really, and there's a map on the wall back there that has the current and proposed transportation network. It's one of the stations, and there'll be a slide here in a minute that shows it as well. But it's basically the network of roads, trails, bike paths, sidewalks that are designed to enable people to move about the city. To complement that, but different, is the complete streets policies, which speak to how that network, how well it accommodates people of different modes: walking, biking, transit, other new emerging technologies like electric bikes, that sort of thing, right? So it's those 2 main areas that we have some questions for you about tonight. Sure, yeah. Yeah, and actually we have one of our questions just exactly about that. Which new technology should we be sure the general plan addresses? Because we know recently you've struggled with some, right? I think a policy decision was made recently related to, was it scooters? Electric scooters, right? Right, and so one thing you can do in the general plan is provide some fairly specific policy direction of what you think is appropriate for Ojai. We don't know what technologies may come in the future, and so we'll have to be very careful about how we craft that language so that as new technologies emerge, there's already very clear policy direction of the general plan. So that's part of what we want to hear from you about tonight is like, what seems consistent with what you love and appreciate and want to see in Ojai? What would be inconsistent? Okay. And just here's a quick synopsis of what we've heard so far about the community, the transportation network. Another question? Yeah. We don't have a copy of it here, but the city has 2 things. It has a complete streets policy that's been adopted by city council and a supporting complete streets master plan. And those, I assume, are available on the Public Works City website. Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Yeah. So, and it's referred to sometimes in different ways, sometimes complete streets, sometimes active transportation. They're all referring kind of to the ways in which we design the right of way of our streets, the public right of way, to accommodate all these different users and uses, right? Oh, it's a subfield of transportation planning and design, I think. It's a way to think about it. Yeah. Right. Yeah, you can. Yeah. And if we need to consider equestrian as another active transportation, then we should be clear about that as well. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. It's a state mandated that, yes, we're required now to address complete streets in a general plan. So, which is a part of the reason we have some specific questions about it. Okay. So anyway, what we've heard so far in the circulation network, and I'm going to tackle these one at a time: first circulation network and then complete streets. People want to see less congestion, better connectivity, especially on the main corridors, make it easier to walk, bike, reserve and expand public parking, maybe expand park and ride, and then certainly provide options for people, trolley, cars, right? Give people many different options and choices about how they get around. And support electric vehicles, very important technology for our climate goals. So here's that map. Can't see it very well on the screen. There's a large board you can study during the open house part of the session, but these are fundamentally some of the questions we have for you tonight is, how do you prefer to travel to neighboring communities? So outside the community. So you'll see on your worksheet some questions around that. We'll ask you to complete that while you're at the transportation station. And then also what new technologies, to your question, that you want to see that the city accommodates and you'd like to use within the city. So again, around these questions, actually, no, I misspoke. We have some questions for you and polls related to that. So if you jump back to Menti, please. Menti.com, if it logs you out, you may need to re-enter the code, and the code again is on the screen. It will, if you're still logged in, should be okay. So that we've advanced to the first question. So if you're already logged in, you should see this next question. And this is a series of questions that seem similar, but they're slightly different. We're first going to ask you about if you commute for work outside of the city, what transportation mode do you currently use? Then we're going to ask you what you'd prefer to use. And then we're going to ask the same question about other trips you take outside of the city. Is there an option for does not apply or, okay. Yeah, if you don't commute, then you don't need to answer this question. We are just curious about people who do have to commute on a regular basis, both what they do and what they'd prefer to do. There'll be another question about other trips outside of the city. We assume all of you take other trips that aren't work related outside the city. The next two questions will be about that. Okay, so a lot of, as we would expect, a lot of drivers alone, some carpooling. I want to bike ride with a person that bikes into Ventura from here. This is outside the city. This is when leaving the city for work. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. We'll assume the remainder do not commute outside the city. So those of you who do commute, how would you prefer? We asked you what you currently do. How would you prefer to commute to your job that's outside of the city? I want to be teleported personally. Yes, if you don't commute, you don't need to answer this question. We'll ask in a minute questions that applies to all of you, which is for any trips other work trips you take outside the city. So, okay, yes, yes, excellent. Lots of interest in carpooling, transit, bike. Good. So people are open to shifting their mode of commuting outside the city. That's good to know. Yeah, so nice thing about this, we'll get the data, we can compare responses to those two questions and see like generally what percentage of people are open to shifting their mode, which means we need in the general plan to make that easier to do, right? So, okay, so other trips. So now everybody should be able to answer this question unless you meet all of your personal needs within the city of Ojai. When you take trips outside of the city, how do you currently typically go? Same options, alone in a car, carpool, bike, other. It's true. The general plan is for people who live in Ojai, but yes, you're right. Absolutely right. Yeah. Yes. Carpooling. Okay, this is good to know. All right. And then what would you prefer? How for these, think of the same sort of trip you just thought of and what you're currently doing, but now how would you prefer to take that trip? All right, some interest in transit, more carpooling, biking. Excellent. Again, people seem open to shifting the mode that they're using to travel outside of the city. I don't remember, but try it and see what happens. All right, sorry. Okay, so are we typically at 30-ish? Yeah, okay, excellent, thank you. Okay, here's the question related to one of the questions that came up earlier. We are curious in the future, what options should we be sure to address in the GP? And what's on the screen is electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, microtransit. And what we mean by that is transit for hire, such as paratransit, micromobility, which is electric scooters, e-bikes, that sort of thing, or other. And again, we don't know what technologies may come in the future. These are some of the current options. Starting over, yeah. Oh no, is it a drop down? Okay, a lot of interest in electric vehicles and micro mobility. That's excellent, excellent. Autonomous, okay. I love the dance the bars do on the screen as people are entering. Yeah. I unfortunately live in the Bay Area, and there's those on the road already, and they're very nerve-wracking. Okay. Yeah, I think we're close. Thank you, Antra. Okay, so back to the presentation, then we'll do some polling, then we'll do the open house really quickly here. So complete streets. Again, that was the second part of transportation that we're here to talk about tonight. And again, the idea here is how within the public right of way, we accommodate all these different uses. And here's some of what we heard from the public already. Make it safe, make it connected, well lit, open to a variety of different modes. Again, a lot of focus on some of the main roads like Ojai Avenue, and then encourage use of the transit in addition to walking and biking, and support EVs as well. There's some overlap between input on complete streets and circulation network. It's a little complicated. So one question we fundamentally have is kind of a shift potentially in the way in which the city approaches complete streets implementation. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you have what is the traditional approach, and it's actually reflected in your current general plan and complete streets plan. It's where you kind of think about the whole city as a system and the network as a system, and pre-plan where you want complete streets improvements. And then over time, as funding makes itself available, you proactively and very deliberately make those planned improvements on certain segments of roadway around the city. It's kind of the historical, traditional approach that planners would take. But more recently, communities have begun to shift a bit. And we're wondering if this is particularly appropriate in Ojai, which seems to prefer more of a case-by-case, like how does our policy apply in this instance sort of approach? So that's what we're lifting up as a contemporary approach, where in your general plan, you'd establish some very clear complete streets principles and direction, but not be very specific about we need this sort of change on this segment of Ojai Avenue. Instead, when the opportunity arose, like you currently have on Ojai Avenue, where there looks like they're doing some utility work, you're going to have to restripe. When opportunities like that come up, then you actually, the engineers and the community consultant, think about what would be the best way to make this more accommodating for pedestrians and bicyclists when we restripe this section of this roadway, right? So that's what that contemporary approach would be like.
We actually have it mapped out.
Yeah, and
what's going to be done when, and at what order, and that sort of thing.
To some extent in your general plan and your complete streets master plan. Yeah.
Trying to do connectivity.
Well, so that's the circulation side of it. Complete streets is the right of way. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yes. Right. Yeah. Well, then I know how you're going to answer the next polling question. So, Well, it is fundamentally about like how we govern ourselves and how we make a decision as a community, right? Do we like traditionally the planners would opt for exactly what you're saying is like think about it as a system. Otherwise, you're going to end up with the hodgepodge, right?
Vote on it. If they want to change it, they can divide it.
Theoretically, yeah. So
It's real.
it's just it's extra steps to take, as you know, right? So then it's first amending the general plan and then making a change. Okay, so we know how you're going to answer the question. That's excellent. So anyway, we also have other complete streets questions, one of which you're going to help us with on a map over here with some sticky dots. And the other is this one I just lifted up. So if you could jump back on Menti quick, we're going to ask your preference about which approach do you think is most appropriate for Ojai. Oh, actually, first we're going to ask about your comfort level walking, then we're going to ask about that approach. So when you walk around town, what is your current level of comfort generally? Does it feel very walkable and safe? Is it mostly comfortable, but there's some areas where it's like, I don't like this street crossing, or I don't have sidewalk here to work with, or whatever comfortable means to you. Do you feel comfortable walking down the street? Okay. Well, so assuming it's hot all throughout the city, where in the city would it not be comfortable despite the heat? Yeah. So, all right. Yes. Well, it's a lot of what goes into complete streets is embedded in this question. It's not just safety, it's lighting, it's amenities, it's the physical built environment that supports walking. Another question? Yeah, question.
I started walking to Ojai.
Great, thank you.
And for 10 years, I surveyed everybody once that day.
Oh, excellent. Do we still have that? Oh, yeah. So it's another nice thing about this poll. We can actually look at how people, by how they answered the age question earlier, by their response to this. So. Sure. Yeah. So, well, and I assume you heard from a lot of those. So we'd love to see your analysis if it's, yeah, but it's probably still relevant. One other question. We want to have room for the time for the open houses. So we. Yep. Excellent. That's okay. Great. Thank you. Yeah. And I'd be interested in talking to you a bit afterwards, because I'd like to know like what you think, how well a complete streets master plan and policy gets us in that direction. What needs to still be done. So, okay. Same question around biking. What's your comfort level generally biking around town? I mean, another way to think about this is, do I walk and bike around town? If so, is it just because I don't like walking and biking, or is it because of my comfort level? It's relative. I guess not. Okay, thank you. And now I think is the next one, the policy. No, more questions. All right. So thinking about downtown specifically, because we know there's some concern around accessibility by bike and on foot to downtown. So do you want to access and get around, or how do you want to, get to and access and get around downtown? Like what mode do you prefer to use? So similar to that question around getting outside of town, but if your destination is downtown, what is the way in which you'd prefer to get there? Yes. Getting there. Or actually, I'm sorry, it's both. It's getting to and access. I'm to focus on getting there. Oh, what's the next one? Okay, great. That's super useful. I'm interested in some people want to live downtown. There's currently not in the greater downtown, there's options to live, but not immediately downtown. All right. Okay. So here's the question I was giving you a little background on earlier. So of those two policy options, so Jeffrey, here's where you're going to choose number one. But what do you think is most appropriate for Ojai? That traditional plan it out in advance and then implement it incrementally based on the plan, or establish clearer goals and policies, and then as opportunities come up to make improvements, you make them on a context specific manner. The question?
This has nothing to do with the whole town. Law is right about.
Yeah, so that would be an example of like, so like the policy could be in the downtown area, prioritize pedestrians, which means then if there was a section of that Ojai Avenue was going to be improved, then we know that that would be a primary goal of the design of the right of way and that for that improvement, right? So that'd be option two, whereas option one would pre-plan that right of way and basically be on the books. And then when the funding presented itself, it would just be implemented that way. All right. A lot of mixed feelings on this. That's good to know. We'll likely end up using a combination of the two. Is there a question? It's odd, huh? Okay, we got a final set of slides and some polling questions, and then we're going to go into the open house. So thank you for your patience. This has taken a little longer than anticipated, but that polling guidance is really very useful for us. The third topic we're dealing with tonight, in addition to transportation and land use, is hazards. So this is no new information for you, I'm sure, but obviously Ojai is susceptible to a number of hazards: heat, drought, flooding, and much of it is going to be exacerbated as the climate continues to change, right? This slide focuses on climate hazards specifically. So since in recent years, there's been a lot of state policy change around the safety element specifically. And a lot of it has been very specific to wildfire, one of the most severe hazards here in Ojai. And this just gives you an overview of what some of those policy changes are, which is the impetus for why we want some of your input on how Ojai should reflect both the state level guidance and local desire for how it prepares itself for what is likely to be the inevitability of future wildfire events in the area, right? Next slide, please. Okay, so on your right on the screen is the current high wildfire hazard map. The areas in purple are those parts of the city that are currently within that high wildfire hazard zone. And we have two questions for you coming up here. One is, based on that current map, what set of measures do you think are appropriate for Ojai to take to protect property and people? And then we have a second question, because it's anticipated that CAL FIRE, we know they're updating the map, and we anticipate that the updated map will include even more of the city. And so preemptively, we'd like to know from you, assuming much more of the city, maybe even the vast majority of the city is going to be in the high wildfire hazard zone, what measures do you think are appropriate? We're focusing on this. We're focusing on the city of Ojai tonight. Yeah. Okay, so it's the current one in force. Yeah, that's the reference layer. Yeah. Yeah, that's why it's being updated by the state. But it is the current one that is the guide for current city policy. Okay, so based on the existing map, you've got a set of 4 policy options to consider. We'd like to know which of those you think are most appropriate for Ojai. Or excuse me, which additional measures do you think the city should adopt? No, I think it's just if we want you to tell us all the ones you think are appropriate. Yeah, I realized that was programmed incorrectly. Can you change that on the fly, or is that not possible? They are generally listed in order of kind of like, aggressiveness, for lack of a better term, like how far the city wants to go to protect people. So if you do select 4, you're indicating that it's, on the more safety oriented end of the spectrum. Blue is retrofit existing structures. Yellow is prohibit high density development in the high fire hazard zone. The red is, and I can't even read that. Require protective mitigating measures. And the pink is require all properties in the zone to create defensible space. This is agnostic to the cause of the fire. This is assuming there will be future fires regardless of the cause. What do we want to do to protect people and property in Ojai? So, yeah. Sure. No, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so the second question is the same options, but in a different scenario. This scenario is assuming the next updated map incorporates much more of the city in the high wildfire hazard zone. Does your answer change? Another way to think about this, right now, those policies would only apply to a small portion of the city. In the future, that zone may encompass much or maybe even all of the city. Do you think the city should do anything different if the map changes significantly? Sorry, another Menti snafu. Okay. What's specifically done is really usually dependent on the site and the structure and what's already in place to mitigate it. The policy would likely establish a base, a floor for like certain, site specific appropriate mitigation measures. So it's hard to be very specific because a lot of it's going to be site specific. So, okay, so thank you again for bearing with us. I want to introduce us to the information that you're going to consider at these open house stations as we break out here. And this is where we're going to get primarily into the land use question. So that's the third topic that we're considering tonight. One fundamental thing that a general plan does is it establishes it has a land use map, and that map is a way that shows what the preferred and appropriate land uses are in the future for the city. And for each use, it defines the appropriate mix of use, the location of that use, and the appropriate density or intensity. How much housing and how much of non-residential uses at what density, like it's measured in FAR, but it's basically how many square feet per acre. So we're particularly tonight focusing on 3 areas. First is the Montgomery Street area in the village mixed use part of the city. And I'll say more about that in a minute. Second area is the Bryant Industrial. And the third is the commercial portions of Ojai Avenue. And we narrow that down based on the input we got at the initial workshop, plus some additional analysis we did since then. And again, just to summarize for you, this is what we've heard so far from people about those 3 areas. We chose them in part because people expressed some interest in change in those areas and provided some specific guidance of the types of change. And so in those areas, in the places where we're proposing options of changing use, it was based on what we've heard from the community so far. In addition, the Planning Commission last year went through each of the general plan elements that are being updated and explored some policy options. So this reflects in part some of that discussion as well. So to be very specific, it had some conversation around some changes around Montgomery Street in the village mixed use area. So we thought it'd be useful to bring some of those ideas to the community to get your broader input. No, they were simply doing a policy review of the elements, and so as issues came up, they discussed them. Didn't provide any specific recommendation or. That's okay. Thank you for joining us. So at each of the stations, you're going to have, and actually on your worksheet that you picked up coming in are these policy questions that you'll get. At each station, you'll find 3 things: a poster of existing conditions, kind of explaining what's currently there, and then a poster showing the policy options. The questions are here; they're also on your worksheet. And then in a minute, I'll explain. They're going to be some design options as well, because when we come back, we're going to ask you some polling questions related to what types of design options do you think are appropriate for the city. So I'm going to turn it over to Megan on our team at this point, who's going to explain to you where we pulled the design options from for you to consider tonight from the downtown neighborhood plan.
Thank you, Ron. Hello, everybody. So I'm going to really briefly cover the draft downtown and neighborhoods plan to explain how we arrived at the design options. So this was a plan that the city produced between, I think, 2015 and 2016. And what it did is it proposed design interventions in different character areas throughout the city, which you could see on the map here. All of these character areas are designated in this plan based on certain characteristics, things like land use similarities. So for instance, the residential areas are all yellow there because they're distinct in character and land use compared to the industrial area, which is shown in dark purple there. Another characteristic that impacted the differentiation between the character areas is building and lot scale. So the architectural character of buildings and how big they are relative to their lot size. And also the public realm. So by public realm, it's kind of a jargony urban design term, but basically the space between buildings, the sidewalks, the landscaping, the streets, the distance between the buildings and the sidewalk, that all impact the visual appearance of the community and how safe it is. So with all of this, the draft Downtowns and Neighborhoods plan proposed a series of design strategies tailored to all of these different character areas. Now, the city conducted a pretty robust community engagement process around this plan. There were community meetings, much like the one we're at now. However, the plan was not adopted. However, we were reviewing results from engagement today, and we were reviewing this plan. We realized that a lot of the recommendations that related to design in this plan may have potential to be carried forward into this general plan update. So today, we are going to present a series of design options. They're at the stations around the room, and we'd like to get your input as to whether these design characteristics are appropriate to Ojai and if they should be included in the general plan update. Next slide. They were originally in the draft Downtowns and Neighborhoods plan. We pulled them out of the plan based on results from community engagement and also our existing conditions analysis and other analysis that we've done throughout this process. These have not been reviewed by the community, I'd say, since the development process of that plan in 2015, and 2016. So we're here today now to get your input as to whether these strategies are appropriate for the city today. So some of these options, I'll go through these really quick just because I know we're low on time and you'll be able to talk to somebody at all the booths to learn more about these strategies. But there are a lot of strategies to improve walkability. This includes things like traffic calming, which is essentially using design strategies to slow down traffic to make it safer for pedestrians and bicyclists. There's also walkability strategies like encouraging new street crossings or building sidewalks on both sides of the street to encourage a safer pedestrian environment. Another strategy could be to locate new buildings close to the sidewalk. This just enhances the pedestrian environment in Ojai and creates more visual interest for pedestrians. We already have expand sidewalks on both sides of the street. So just for emphasis, it's there twice. We have designed buildings with ground floor uses, access through shop frontages, and second floor uses through separate street facing entrances. So basically what this means is encourage design that really distinguishes the active ground floor uses in buildings like, your retail, your restaurants, and really distinguishes this from the second floor uses like office or residential. And you could do this through things like, awnings, big windows, and grander entryways to really draw people into these spaces. Other strategies include encouraging front entryways and street access to homes, encouraging walkability and creating more attractive homes and a more engaging community. Encouraging garages to be located behind primary buildings. So moving parking to the back so that, cars are parked behind the buildings. And planting street trees. This is a huge component of what we experience when we walk around the community. So encouraging street trees in front yards on private property, but also in publicly owned spaces. Next slide. A couple more here. I know I'm going through these really quick. You can learn a little bit more about them later. Encouraging parking lots to be screened, which is another term for concealed or hidden. So locating parking lots behind buildings or concealing them with landscaping or low walls. And what this does is it, puts the emphasis back on the building itself rather than parking. Developing entryways into different areas. So by entryways, we mean things like signage or landscaping, things like this that distinguish the different character areas from each other and really imbue a sense of identity into the different parts of the city. We have encouraging porches, stoops, terraces, and other elements that make buildings look engaging and interesting from the street. Encouraging building design that transitions smoothly from commercial character to residential character. So for instance, if you have a building being designed between a commercial district and a residential district, there are strategies that we can undertake to create a smooth transition. So things like height step downs, encouraging architectural design that kind of blends the characteristics of the commercial and residential areas. Another walkability idea here, improving walkability through street features such as bulb outs. Bulb outs are sidewalk extensions, and what they do is they reduce the walking distance from one curb to another, so it makes it a bit safer for pedestrians to cross. Encouraging office and administrative uses to locate towards the front of lots, and encouraging street-facing windows. Those last two are just things that are there that, again, it just orients buildings towards the street and makes a more, makes facades in the city a bit more welcoming and inviting to people. So as we said, we'll have a chance to talk more about these later. Yes, question. Well, the plan was developed before SB9. We haven't really.
That obviously could impact the
Yeah.
Well, that's an excellent point. And so SB9 speaks to allowing additional density from residential areas. And related to it, but a different state law is the objective design standards, which each city has to develop. And so part of the point here is the input we get back from you tonight will inform general plan policies that in turn inform development objective design standards. We ask these questions because we know that you value very highly in Ojai the sense of place, the character of the place. And so we want to make sure that future design, streetscape improvements reflect what you consider to be the true character of the place, right? And so at each of the stations, you're going to have a poster that shows a list of options that are listed on the screen that Megan introduced that we think might be appropriate for that place. So 3 places: Village Mixed Use Area, Bryant, Ojai Corridor. Then we're going to come back and ask you using some polls, which you think are most appropriate for those different parts of town. So we're going to break out into the open house stations at this point. Does everybody have a worksheet? Should say policy options worksheet, open house, workshop, open house worksheet. Yeah, workshop at the top, and then in blue, open house worksheet. Lucas, does the city have a ADA coordinator who addresses requests for accommodation? All right. Does anyone not have a worksheet? All right. So what you're going to do is go to each of the 4 stations. Back here is Village Mixed Use. There's questions associated with that. To digest the information, there'll be a resource person there to help you out, answer the question. Bryan Industrial up here in the corner, Ojai Corridor in the back, along with transportation. We'll plan to come back together around 7:10, 10 minutes after 7 if we can. everybody. If you could please find your seat. Again, we will all stick around afterwards. We can talk some more at the stations. You know, I just got to say, I really appreciate the interest, the enthusiasm, the knowledge that this community brings to some of these key questions. I really enjoyed the conversations we had at the stations. And again, we can continue some of those if you'd like after we wrap up formally. But for those who do want to head on with their lives at 7:30, we do want to kind of wrap up the more formal part of the workshop. Again, we're happy to stay afterwards and continue some of these conversations. We want to make sure you have a chance to answer the questionnaire, the worksheet, very thoughtfully. So we're happy to hang out, help you complete that. We would like it if you can to turn it in before you go tonight. So got a few more things for you here at the end. We have some quick polls again to get your input on some of the design options that Megan presented. And then we have an opportunity for you to provide some of your reflections based on what you were thinking about as you considered the questions at the stations. So Antra, yes, okay. So one more time back to Menti. Appreciate that you guys have had fun with this tonight. We have just some final questions around design. We're curious about which of those design options that Megan presented you think are appropriate, but in different parts of the city, along the corridor, in the Bryant area, and in the Village mixed use area. So first question, thinking about downtown, and this is really just like the core downtown, mostly right around Ojai Avenue and that arcade vicinity, kind of what you consider core downtown. Which of the following design improvements are appropriate? Encourage new buildings to locate close to the sidewalk, like really zero frontage, zero setback on the front. Design buildings with ground floor uses access through shop front frontages and second floor uses through separate street facing entrances. A lot of people ask me about, does housing along Ojai corridor include potentially housing on a second floor? This would be a design improvement that would accommodate that, allowing different entrances first and second floor. Third, encourage parking lots to be screened or concealed behind buildings so that cars don't become the dominant feature. The buildings and their historic character remains the dominant feature. And improve walkability through traffic calming along the corridor. We heard a lot about that in the surveys and the workshop. We're curious again, how important you think that design element is in the downtown area. It's too bad you can't see it very well on the screen in front, but maybe on your phone. This has a cool combination sliding scale bar graph feature to give you a sense of, like, relative to other responses, how many people are favoring that particular design improvement. Right. Well, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It was just separate entrances was the key idea. Yeah. But we've all seen that sort of classic downtown where you see a door off to the side of the retail. It immediately opens and goes upstairs, right? This speaks to access to that second floor. Yes. I'm sorry. City person familiar with the building code doesn't currently require elevators to second floor, right? Not for residential. Okay. We've had 15 people answer this question. Are there some more answers coming in? Yeah, they're actually going to be available through the project website through the 14th of August. So yeah, it's part of the reason we're doing that. We suspect you're going to go home and tell the rest of your historic commissioners they got to be sure to get on the website and answer these Menti questions, right? And you're probably going to tell them how to answer. Okay, great. Where are you seeing that? It's a traffic calming measure. When cars are feeling more constrained, sometimes in part from parking on the side of the street, they slow down. which makes it safer for other users. Okay, we're gonna move on from this question. So now we're gonna ask a similar question about the VMU. So this is the areas both north and south of the core downtown. Which design improvements do you think are appropriate there? Same parking lot question. This also speaks to porches, stoops that are designed to engage people from the sidewalk, from the street. Entryways to the neighborhoods, like mini gateways to distinguish different neighborhoods and what distinguishes them. And then design that really facilitates that transition and use from a more mixed or commercial dominated to more residential. We're really focusing on, we're focusing more on design elements than, this is more public realm design. Yes.
So, the question about development entryways.
Megan, can you say a bit more about that design element, kind of neighborhood gateways idea? Like what would be some examples?
So oftentimes when you go to different areas of the city, they're demarcated by signs or a distinct landscaping palette or things like pavers, something that kind of creates a unique identity for different areas of the city. So for the village mixed use area, I believe the downtown neighborhoods plan proposes more like street trees and other elements that kind of welcome you into this area that kind of distinguish it from other neighborhoods in the city.
No, just a welcoming, like just, hey, you're transitioning into a different place sort of thing. A gateway. Yeah. Okay, so if you don't like that one, Jeffrey, then rank it really low. Yeah, so that you'd put that one somewhere in the middle if you have mixed feelings. That's what I like about this question mode is you can kind of like put it right about where you feel. Don't have to answer it, make it very binary. Thank you, Antra. Save us from our questions. Which of the following design improvements are appropriate for Bryant for the industrial area? Currently, it has kind of this interesting light industrial, want to sometimes be retail sort of feel. What design improvements are appropriate for that area? Walkability, adjust the frontage of the non-residential uses, sidewalks specifically, screen some of the more arguably offensive uses, encourage street-facing windows. There's some ideas in the DMP for that area. Yes, question. These are not about uses. These are about public realm design, the feel you get either driving or walking along the street or biking. It's really about the feel of the place, that public realm between the road and the private building. A few more minutes here. Okay, is this about what we've been getting for this round? And then is this the final one? Ojai or no, two more. Okay. Ojai Avenue. Options include locate buildings with little or no setback from the sidewalk, orient office and admin uses towards the front lots. Yeah. Does it say widening? No, I was talking about the frontage between the building and the sidewalk. But there is a question about improving walkability, including making sure there's sidewalks on both sides of the street, improving crossings, slowing traffic down. A few more minutes. That's a downside of this mode. Yes.
I have something.
You could put it on your worksheet if you like. Just a note at the bottom around design. You can fill out another one and put a note on it. Okay, final question. Residential neighborhoods. Some of these design improvements, people didn't want to see a lot of fundamental transformative change in residential neighborhoods, but they seemed open to some design enhancements. And so here's some ideas for how we might improve the design of neighborhoods. Front entryways, porches and stoops. Be thoughtful about where the garage goes, and encourage more trees.
I think trees are fine. Like the hills, yeah.
Yes, question. That's true. It's supposed, most policy decisions are supposed to be consistent with the general plan. So it's typically part of a staff report kind of that explains how an application or proposal is consistent with the general plan. So yes. Well, so you guys have design guidelines, and so and it's built into your regulatory decision-making process referring to those, right? And so that's part of the answer to your question is, and cities approach it in different ways. Some have guidelines which are simply considered, but not regulatory in a sense. And that's currently the way Ojai primarily is operating. And it's kind of sounding like what you're saying is probably most appropriate is like, you don't want to mandate things and be overly restrictive and like reduce creativity and diversity, right? But there's also ways to provide guidance, and these all use the word encourage, provide guidance so that for people who want, as they're thinking about their design, they could consult at least those guidelines and then choose what's appropriate for what they're building. So that's like the other end of the spectrum. Well, so that was a lot of what went into the downtown and neighborhood planning process, was kind of talking through like what sorts of improvements seem appropriate for Ojai. That's where these ideas were generated. So now we're kind of asking, which do you think are most appropriate for these different parts of the city? What we do with that will depend in large part, like by kind of how people respond to these questions, right? So that's great feedback. So a lot of it is the how, right? Yeah. And so again, I mentioned earlier, state's going to is requiring every city now to do objective design standards, which is designed to facilitate the construction of housing. That speaks proposed new residential uses specifically. And so as City Ojai does that, it needs to consider like, how do we both maintain the character and diversity and eclectic nature of the city, while also being true to the character, but not being overly restrictive, right? And so it comes down to like how those objective design standards are written, right? And the GP can guide like how we strike that balance between kind of guidance, and this is generally what we'd like to preserve and not be overly constraining. And so, well, we're really kind of curious what people think, right? Because it'll inform like how we bring options to the city council, right? So, yeah, one final question, then we're going to do some next steps, then open the floor, and then we'll break and allow people to spend more time at stations if they'd like. So, Bill, you had a question?
We have comments. Don't fit the question. How can we split them?
You can write it on the worksheet if you'd like, just as a.
Is there any email?
Yeah, you can always email Lucas. Yeah, whose website or email address is on the project website. Okay, very quickly. Just want to recap next steps. We're at 7:30, a little after 7:30 now. So we want to let people who have other places to go. We're going to take all of this community input and wrap it into recommendations based on some additional analysis as appropriate, and bring that first to Planning Commission and then to City Council, who will provide us some direction. And that'll be the foundation for writing the draft general plan, which will come back to the community for review. If you're not already on the project's email list, you can go to the website and get on the email list. And there is Lucas's email on the screen as well. If you have additional thoughts, comments after the workshop, he will pass those comments on to the planning team. So we're now at the conclusion of the workshop. These slides, by the way, will be on the website as well, along with all the other workshop materials. And what we want to do now is provide an opportunity for people to quickly, 30 seconds or left, hopefully, share any thoughts, comments, reflections they had based on the work they did and the conversations they had and the information that they digested at the stations. And then we'll break and people can go as they need to. And then we'll stick around again, as I mentioned, to help people at the stations additionally if you still haven't completed your worksheet. Before you go, please put your completed worksheet in the box in the back, because we really need your responses to help inform next steps. So anyone want to share a comment with the group? What stood out? What new ideas, insights?
Okay. What stood out to me, and I'll preface this by saying thank you to you all and the city for all the effort that goes into this. I do appreciate it. I feel like this group is very small and not very representative of the whole community. I just learned about this workshop today, and I'm happy to share ideas about how we can better notify the community about this.
It's an excellent point, and this is always an issue with public engagement for a planning process. And so we try not to limit it to kind of either come now or you're just not in the loop. And so, as James mentioned at the beginning of the workshop, all these materials will be on the project website. The Menti poll will remain open through August 14th, a week from Sunday. So people can continue to answer these same Menti polling questions. And then we're going to figure out a way for people to complete the worksheet as well, which will also be on the website, and turn that in as well. And so over the coming 2-3 weeks, people will continue to, in an asynchronous way, digest the same information. The slides will be on the website. The recording of the presentation will be on the website. People can basically have a similar experience at a different time convenient for them, provide the same level of feedback. The Menti poll can stay open until the 14th. We haven't yet talked about a hard deadline for providing the worksheet, but it sounds like maybe a reasonable time frame as well, 2 weeks-ish.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
Yeah, okay.
If you're not already following the city's Facebook page,
Thank you. For those of you who didn't hear that, the city has a Facebook page, and all the information about tonight's workshop is linked through that. And is there an easy to remember, like City of Ojai? Can't forget that. If you're on Facebook.
We'll be reporting on this meeting and giving updates on the general plan as it goes along, as we have been, and it is on our brand new website and our digital app. So please download it.
And thank you for having an article about it. I think I saw it this weekend. Thank you. And thank you for covering it, because we know the media is an important way in which to keep people informed and involved as well. So thank you. What stood out? What insights? Any final thoughts before you go about like what the questions we posed for you at each of these stations? Anything you want to share with the group? Here you go, Bill.
Because in my opinion, Ojai being so attractive is being bought up by a bunch of other people or people who have money that are here. And unless we do something significantly in the next few years about housing, we're going to be like Sun Valley, and we're going to lose a lot of our service people because they can't no longer live here or function here. And we're going to lose a lot of our retail anyway, and our cachet.
Thank you, Bill. And that's exactly why we're curious whether you think housing is an appropriate use both along Ojai corridor and in the Bryant area, to see if we could expand options for where housing could be built.
I want to thank you, Ron, and we should give him a hand, really, for getting us this far. And I'd like to say it's a very tough thing for all of us to consider when we deal with aspects of a city general plan in pieces. Housing over here, commercial over there, transportation over there, and to put them all together in our mind into a place that is the most fun, the most alive, the most Ojai, is a really big job. And I think we should all give ourselves a gold star for this evening. And I'd like to use the word public realm. You use the word public realm, and that's sort of an amorphous thing. That's a public realm. But it could be used to help us understand what a more beautiful and lively place would be as we connect housing to commerce with a public realm. This might even be just a tree-lined sidewalk or something, but it's a way of cementing the place.
Thank you. And you put your finger on exactly why I'm a planner, because I like to think of those interconnected systems. Unfortunately, the state requires us to develop different elements for these different uses, but if done well, the GP will present them in an integrated way where they complement each other really nicely. I was going to be disappointed if Jeffrey didn't have a final comment.
I more a question. Where is parking requirements? What section is that in? Because you addressed all these questions as though parking is going to be required. So how are we going to screen it? But we didn't address them, because, well, most planners, most cities are moving away from minimum parking requirements for residential. It raises the price of residential if you're doing developments, and it raises the price. Huh? Oh, anyway. I just think that is something that this community needs to address. And so far it's been addressed behind closed doors. So thank you.
Thank you for raising that. It hadn't really popped up as a major issue, but it should be addressed, because you're right. It's one of the fundamental ways cities are reconsidering their relationship between land use and the transportation system. And we give so much space to parking currently. It's like, is that really the best use, highest and best use? That's, do you want the mic?
My question, I just have a question, and we've talked a lot about all these different issues today. And I have a question about water. This is all wonderful stuff, but if we encourage so many people to have here, and we need people, but where are the water resources we're going to get for all of this? And I haven't been to the other meetings. Has that been discussed? Because I don't know.
Excellent question. Good planning starts with making sure that there's those fundamental systems in place to accommodate anticipated growth. One of the reports in the back looks at water specifically, including forecasts for expanding and the water supply conservation to make sure there's enough water for future populations. Ojai is not anticipated to grow significantly in the next decades. And so if memory serves, I haven't looked at it recently, it's assumed there is enough water currently for the projected growth. But yes, we certainly do consider that. And there was another question or comment in the back. Oh, it's in one of those reports. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's relatively slow and low. Yeah, I was going to say it's even less than that. There's some projections where it's either flat or negative in some respects. It's not expected to grow significantly. Yeah. Any other final comments? Thank you all for coming out tonight. We'll stick around for people who need more time completing their worksheets. If you have completed it, please turn it in before you go. Thank you very much again for coming out and giving us your time.